Good afternoon and welcome to an Ethical Cooperation by Reuters Events webinar on traceability and visibility, how to successfully map and monitor across the tires. I'm Anna Uskanga, Project Director at Ethical Cooperation. In times like this, with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, companies have the difficult task of combating this global challenge, while still monitoring and acting on key social and environmental risk within their supply chain. Besides, this pandemic has increased an already complex challenge for companies, transforming your whole operations and supply chain mode. From energy efficiency and sustainable R&D to supplier empowerment and Scope 3, deep dive on how companies build resilience across their entire operations. Companies are in need to map and monitor these processes. Tackling key sustainability risk within the supply chain has been a challenge that we have heard from a number of years, and no doubt the COVID-19 pandemic adds even greater complexity to this issue. So as part of the newly launched Responsible Business webinar series, I'm pleased to introduce today's webinar with 4 great minds who will share their ideas, strategies, and learnings in how to successfully map and monitor across the supply chain. And no doubt, there will be some discussions as to how COVID-19 has and will impact their work in the coming months. So it is my pleasure to hand over to Ian Hope, who will lead and moderate today's discussion. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Anna. By way of introduction, I have worked with agricultural supply chains in the private sector to address the many challenges that have and continue to rise. COVID-19, as Anna has highlighted, has produced another layer of challenge and disruption. Some have termed this a crisis in a crisis. It will certainly have near and long-term impacts that need to be considered in maintaining a sustainable supply of food and raw materials for business and the customers they serve. However, it is important that we do not create a separate agenda to deal with this new health challenge, but integrate it and intensify our efforts in building that supply chain resilience right back to the source, and that's the important area. Nor distract ourselves from the urgency and passion of the work that was in place before the pandemic hit. That effort needs to ensure that we have visibility and traceability of our supply chains in order for us to assess the level of disruption and to map and understand the priorities and pressure points that are holding us back from making progress. Once we have this, we can put in place the relevant local actions that can make a real difference. So I welcome everybody here today. We get to hear 3 separate stories from companies that really understand the supply chains in which they operate. They each have established their individual partnerships and relationships with their suppliers to collectively chase and act on the things that really matter. Resilience means having the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, to bounce back. Never before have we been tested as much, nor has this work been more critical or relevant. So I hope all of you will take something home today from each of the 3 speakers to embrace and continue this work, because the urgency obviously has gone up a little bit more. So moving right on, we'd love to introduce Ynzo from Tony's Chocolonely, a real passionate talker, and as he says, an evangelist in the agenda that he's got. So Ynzo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ian. So before I can tell a little bit about what we do as a company, about how we do things as a company, I'd like to first explain, and also obviously how COVID is affecting what we're doing and also the partners that we work with. I'd like to explain a little bit of the background of cocoa and chocolate, so why we even came to be as a company. I'm trying to keep this to the smallest nutshell I can do, but I tend to fail when I put things in a nutshell, but I'll do my utter best. So how does the world of cocoa look? Cocoa grows around the equator. There's a bit of cocoa that comes from Asia. There's a bit of cocoa that comes from Central and South America. But the majority of all cocoa nowadays comes from Western Africa, from millions of tiny farms. These aren't huge plantations. These are 1, 2, 3, maximum 4 hectare size, family-run businesses millions of those. So that's one side of the value chain. The other side of the value chain is billions of consumers like, well, you and I, who just want to be able to munch down on a bar of chocolate each and every day in your life without feeling any sense of guilt. In the middle of that value chain, though, there's only a handful of companies that actually produce chocolate from cocoa. So these are bigger industrials, but also better known brand names like Nestle, Mars, Hershey's, etc. And it tends to be in the interest of these companies that the price of cocoa remains low. And in our opinion, that's the source of the issue is the fact that the farmers on those cocoa farmers aren't paid an actual living income reference price. Now, how does that look? From two countries in Western Africa, Ghana and Ivory Coast. Next slide, please. There comes 60% of all cocoa in the whole wide world. Can you put it on the next slide, please, Annie? Yeah, thanks. And that cocoa comes from about 2.5 million cocoa farms in Ghana and Ivory Coast alone. And on those farms, there is 2.3 million children that work there, of which 90%, so 2.1 million children, work under illegal circumstances. So that means these kids work with heavy machinery, work with chemicals, walk around with big sharp machetes, or at the age of 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, go around with carrying bags of cocoa beans that weigh 60 kilos per bag. And we find that ridiculous in this day and age. And of those kids, at least 30,000 are subject to something that is, in our opinion, a form of modern slavery. So these kids do unpaid, forced work, sometimes are lured from neighboring countries like Burkina Faso under false pretenses, like we're going to educate you to become a cocoa farmer, you'll be able to send home some money. But these kids sometimes disappear in that industry. Now, we find that utterly ridiculous in 2020 for a product that nobody actually needs, right? Chocolate. Now, in 2005, there were a couple of Dutch journalists running a Dutch television show called Keuringsdienst van Waarde, which is more or less the equivalent of the 60 Minutes of Food or the Food CIA. So it's an investigative journalistic program that looks at the reality behind, let me put this diplomatically, some nonsense in the food marketing. And the journalist, next slide, please, Teun van de Keuken from that program was utterly shocked when he realized that chocolate firms weren't really taking their responsibility in this field, even though they had signed an agreement a couple of years earlier, the Harkin and Engel Protocol, to eradicate the worst forms of child labor from the cocoa industry within 5 years' time. And almost at the end of that term, they made this television show about the fact that nothing had changed in the industry, nothing had been done towards change in the industry. But Teun couldn't get to speak to any of the big chocolate firms on camera, so Teun came up with this smart move. Teun bought 10 different bars of different brands of chocolate, of which he was sure that somewhere in the value chain there had been forced child labor, and he put a camera on himself. And he took a bite of each and every of those chocolate bars, and he called the international alarm number, 112. And he said, I want to turn myself in as a chocolate criminal because, so he reasoned, by consuming chocolate of which he knew that there was forced child labor in there, he made himself complicit to financing these modern forms of slavery. Now, Teun wasn't being taken seriously, obviously, so he set up a court case against himself to indict himself as an accomplice to child slavery. And in the end, he wasn't sentenced by the judge, but he did kick off this whole campaign of awareness through his program. And in the end, he started off his own little chocolate company, Tony's Chocolonely. Tony's the international name for Teun, and Chocolonely for his lonely battle in the chocolate industry, hence the unpronounceable brand name that we still go by today. And that was 15 years ago. Next slide, please, Anna. We have now become recently the market leader in the Netherlands in the field of chocolate, outdoing all traditional competition, as you see. And we're available in Scandinavia, Germany, Belgium, France, UK, US, and some exotic places across the world, because For us, this growth means that we can make a more global impact when it comes to really making sure that farmers reach a living income. So next slide, please. In our strategy, we have 3 steps, of which the first one is simply to create awareness about this bitter reality that still exists in the chocolate industry today. The second step in our strategy is that we want to show the industry that chocolate can be made in a different way, in a more sustainable way, in a more social way, in our opinion, simply in a better way. And the last step is to inspire other organizations to really take their responsibility and also act when it comes to respecting human rights in their value chain. So how do we think you can reach that humongous goal of 100% slavery-free chocolate worldwide? That's by taking responsibility in 5 steps, we say. So we say our recipe for slave-free cocoa, some people would call it the sourcing principles, of which the most important one is to take responsibility for your full value chain. So where the industry tends to not work with traceable cocoa beans, we now source our cocoa beans directly from 7 cooperatives nowadays in Ghana and Ivory Coast, from about 6,500 farmers in those 2 countries, because we believe taking that responsibility for your full value chain is essential in this thing. That's on the next slide. So because by taking this responsibility for your full value chain, we can actually pay a higher price directly to the farmers where we source our cocoa beans. So we pay on top of the market price, we pay an additional premium, the fair trade premium, and we pay an additional Tony's premium to get these farmers to the living income, as we say. And a living income, in my opinion, shouldn't be debated constantly. It simply means that a farmer can feed his family, have a roof over his head, and essential also for us, send his kids to school. We go for long-term relationships with these farmers. We help them increase their productivity and also the quality of the cocoa beans, so there's better chocolate to be made from their cocoa beans. And we also support the cooperatives that they're united in to have a stronger stand in that hourglass of a value chain that I described earlier on. Because we're convinced that we can make our chocolate 100% slave-free, but that is not what we're about. It's actually working together with the rest of the industry, working together with governments, working together with consumers and also retailers to make sure that together we can make all chocolate worldwide 100% slave-free. So that is in a nutshell what we do as Tony Chocolonely and how we do things as Tony Chocolonely. Back to you, Ian.
And so thank you very much. Quite an empowering story. You've really created a priority for the business, and it sounds like you are starting to influence a very complex industry as well, with some big players in there. How did you, just share with us how you actually got traceability into the agenda, and how did you navigate up into that complex supply chain to set up these relationships with the cooperatives and the farmers? Was that difficult?
We tend to project things as very simple, but it tends to be very complex, yes. So we literally went there having no idea how the system worked, and started working first with one cooperative in Ghana, and later on Ivory Coast as well, because we realized that the problem of forced child labor was even bigger in Ivory Coast. It's taken a while, and my operations, my value chain partner Frans, when he comes back from Africa, he always said, Ynzo, I come back with more questions than what I got answered because the system is so complex. But we always say that this complexity shouldn't mean that you don't take your responsibility for the full value chain, because we show that it is possible. Yes, it has taken time. It has taken time to build these long-term relationships. It takes time on the ground to build trust, and we still run into issues left and right now. But by just being slightly hard-headed and outspoken and willful in the things that we do, we have shown that it is possible to build this value chain, this fair chain with these farmers and these cooperatives that we work with.
Yeah. Just one last one before we go on to Saskia is that the enthusiasm you're getting once you've got to that source, how much of the agenda is driven back at you then once you understand, once you've arrived and once you are starting to work on a passionate area that you've identified as a business? How much more does come back at you when you learn from that relationship established right down to the grower level? Are they setting their own agenda as well? Is it a two-way street?
Yes. No, it's very much a two-way street. And I think that's an essential part in our strategy as well. It's not like the Dutch come in and determine how things should be done. So we have a very equal relationship with these cooperatives and with these farmers. So for example, of the premium that we pay to the cooperatives, they decide what to do with that premium in their community. It's not us that decide. We help them build 5-year plans. We help them to get the most out of this premium, but it's very much an entrepreneurial relationship between us. We simply pay a fair price to these farmers for the produce that they deliver to us, but it's up to them what they do with that money.
That's a really good point, because obviously to get investment back into their areas of production is really, really essential. Are you seeing your message percolate or cultivate outside the cooperatives? Is it making a difference to the local areas of production and other crops they grow and getting some enthusiasm? Does it spread?
It spreads. A good example, for example, is that we have 2 routes of getting funds back to the farmers. One is this entrepreneurial relationship that we have, where we pay a living income reference price to the farmers. The second one is the fact that 1% of our total revenue goes into the Tony's Foundation, and they, for example, finance things like when we talk to a farmer and ask him why his kids aren't going to school, and they tell us, well, the next nearest school is 30 kilometers down the road, so it's almost impossible. We start helping to build schools in that community. And when that school is set up in that community, it isn't just for the farmers that deliver beans to Tony's Chocolonely. It's for everybody in the whole community. So the whole community benefits of this. And also, for example, some communities, we buy beans from certain farmers and not other farmers, but all of them deliver to the same cooperative. Then that cooperative sometimes decides to spread a bit of the premium that we pay to the whole community, not just to those farmers. So yes, there's an increase there, but honestly, we work now with 6,638 farmers, and there's more than 2.5 million farms in Ghana and Ivory Coast alone. So we're a drop in the ocean, unfortunately, still.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Once you get that enthusiasm, and I presume you don't just have a 1-year relationship. You've been able to build this relationship that you go back and back to see some of the benefits coming through.
Exactly. So one of our 5 pillars is building these long-term relationships, and that means that we have agreements with these cooperatives that we'll keep buying the cocoa beans from them for 5 years ahead. And that's a unilateral agreement, so they can walk away whenever they want to, but we are committed to keep buying their beans so they can invest in their farms and have this long-term assurance that they can keep selling their beans to us.
That's a really important point to take. Listen, a really exciting. I know you have to leave early, but hopefully we can get some questions to you at the end from the audience. But really good, and I wish you all well, and to really influence that agenda for others to take notice of.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on now to Saskia from Fenix Outdoor, who has a great story to tell, particularly as we move from food to textiles. So Saskia, over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Saskia. I'm based in Germany, in Hamburg. So hope you're all well. I'd like to present the company Fenix Outdoor to you today. And maybe next slide, please. So Fenix Outdoor International is founded in the 80s, and the main foundation is the probably very known brand Fjällräven. At least a lot of people from you had seen one of the backpacks, the Konken, before. And after founding the holding, Fenix decided to move on and buying more outdoor brands, as you can see on the right-hand side, like Primus for cooking and stoves for the outdoors, Tierra, Hanwag for our shoes, Royal Robbins as travel brand from San Francisco, and Brunton is our compass based in the US. And next to our brands, we also have a retail chain, which is called Freelufts, and we are based in the Nordics and in Germany. Please, next slide. So why am I here today is because I'd like to talk about next traceability, about our CSR journey. And I think one very special thing within Fenix is that the CSR department is based on a very high level next to the chairman of Fenix Outdoor. And so we report directly to him. And in 2012, when we started our CSR journey, or the sustainability journey, we established a Fenix Way. The Fenix Way is based on our compass and our four direction, as you can see on the chart: North for nature, E for economy, S for society, and the W for well-being. And this is kind of like the guide through everything we face right now and in the future. And we also talk about what we do on the sustainability journey in our Fenix CSR report, as you can see on the right-hand side. And I really recommend you to look into that. You find that on phoenixoutdoor.se because we have great stories to tell of all these years annually. Next slide, please. So we have more reasons why we would like to become more transparent and trace our products down the supply chain. Looking into the textile supply chain for priority at the moment, we're trying to figure out all the components, where are they coming from? So here you see a winter jacket from Fjällräven, and you can see that we have 54 different components in one jacket. So how do we find out where they all come from? It's spread around the world, and to really dig down to that, we're trying to become more transparent beyond tier 2. So in the textile industry, you talk about tier levels, and tier 1 is the garment partner who sews the products for us. And then beyond that, you have the tier 2 level, which is the fabric. And then beyond that, you have the mills. And then on the tier 4 level, you mostly end up on the crop field. So this is a journey we would like to face now. And we have more arguments to do so, because if you click further, Anna, please, we have a lot of other pressures coming from the media, especially in the textile industry, and other competitors, other brands, as you can see for some examples here, like Patagonia, who are already trying to be transparent in the whole value chain. And they just released the Transparency Index in the Fashion Revolution Week. You might have seen it on social media. I would highly recommend you to look into that, because it's like a index looking into 250 textile brands now, and asking them how about transparency, and how really far can you go down in your supply chain. So that's a question for the modern time you really need to answer as a sustainable brand. If you click on, Anna, please. And then there are also a lot of requests coming in for us to fill out as a brand, next to being member of, for example, the United Nations Climate Change, or other industry organization. They all ask about sustainability criteria. Also, there are more sustainability labels, which we also implemented, the greener choice in our own retail chain, who ask all these detailed questions about the product and where does it come from. So we really need to do something about it and have all the answers prepared. And next to all of that, if you click on, Anna, there's a huge rise of national action plans, like due diligence, like how far do you have to take responsibility in your supply chain. So you see on that map down below that there are so many countries now who are asking you about, for example, the Modern Slavery Act. What do you do to really know your supply chain? And are you aware that you do not have any child labor in your products working for you? And so this is the reason why we're doing what we do now, and what I would like to present to you now. On the next slide, please. We have teamed up with a Swedish startup called Trace. And TrustTrace is a blockchain technology who is trying to help brands to really face traceability in your supply chain. So on the left side, you see a product. For example, you maybe think about the red jacket from Fjällräven you just saw. It's on the top. And so we try to reach out through TrustTrace to the garment facturer, so the one who's sewing our product, and then asking them, what is the next supplier? Where do you get all the components from? So for example, where does the fabric come from? Can you please share the supplier with us? So the supplier fills out on the right-hand side, you see what the supplier sees, all these information we need to really know exactly where is the component coming from. And so in the end, hopefully, we can see a supply chain tree beautiful build up like you see on the left-hand side with all the components. And right now we are having 4 of our brands using the system. We just started last year. So we're still testing together with TrustTrace how far can we go, and we're already having great success, but also facing some challenges. Like for example, there are some supplier hesitant about opening up and asking, why do you need that information, and how can we help you in a different way besides opening up our supply chain? So it's a big question about the whole industry to become more transparent, but we believe it's really helping to really manage your supply chain, not only the risk, but also to thrive more sustainability efforts beyond the tier 1, so the garment manufacturer, and to really gain deeper knowledge about the CO2 emissions, for example, we really have an impact on with our products. So there are a lot of CSR projects in the pipeline waiting to really go down in the supply chain. And before that, we really have to build our supply chain in a transparent way. And right now we do that with TrustTrace. And if you click on, Anna, please. So for Fenix Auto, we always try to, make a positive contribution rather than being negative for our world. And we really want to leave the nature as it is, because the products we produce, they are for the nature and not to destroy them. So that's it for me from the moment.
Thanks very much, Saskia. Going down to a tier 4 supply chain, again, a bit like Ynzo, it's very, very complex. So with your work with TrustTrace, could you just tell us some of that process? Do you end up at a situation where you have a commonality with other companies, or you have a commonality, or do you meet other industries along that way, or companies, that then you create a partnership so you get a consistency going on, or do you find this is a singular path?
No, it's not. As I understand blockchain, you always need to collaborate with others. So we've spoken to a lot of other brands, like for example in the German outdoor industry, and some of them are also testing it right now. So it makes sense that because you share suppliers along the way, it really makes sense to work together as an industry to tackle, the transparency. And in the end, the dots will connect only because more users are using the blockchain technology.
Yeah. Let me dial back a little bit with some of the corporate work you've got within Fenix, because I think when you look at the Fenix way, I took the opportunity to go online, as you said, and I encourage others on the call to do that. But it appears like it's a very big guiding document that you've got there. A lot of difficulty that I've seen with other businesses is, where does this sustainability agenda sit? Which function? Is it procurement? Is it operations? But you seem to have embedded it right at top level management. And you seem to, through your compass that you've got, that you highlighted in your presentation, send some very good guiding principles and values and objectives. Do you find this helps you, and obviously as you make that journey down to tier 4, have been able to lay some of the expectations with suppliers? And do you see a commonality when you do actually see coming across other companies of creating that consistency? So 2 questions probably. One is, how important is that Fenix way in as you navigate down into the supply base? And the second one, do you find it difficult to get in consistency?
So maybe starting to answer this internally. We have been updating our Fenix way, or we call it like a Bible, our morality Bible, our ethical guide. And so we're training our management team for a first step to really follow the ethical compass guidelines in everything they decide on every day. So we also push that down on our supply chain. And so we really want our production manager who have daily contact with our suppliers to talk and act in an ethical way as we have outlined it in our Fenix way. So whenever there's an issue, we first recommend to speak to each other and find the reason how we can manage that issue together. In a more long-term and sustainable way. And as an outdoor industry, I think you have the luxury to do that, and you have more time because you don't have so many seasons as other textile brands. So the relationships are very, very long term. And for example, for Fjärreven, they have been for 40 years. So they understand the values the brand has in their core, and they also live it. And whenever you see and visit them, you can see that they really want to develop together, almost as one company. So does that answer your question?
Sure. I was just impressed the way some agendas really struggle to get traction because top management hasn't got buy-in. But I was impressed the way that you have got top level management buy-in. I just wanted to sort of share with the audience that it does help when you actually move up these supply chains, that you can take some of the principles and objectives. It gives you confidence. It gives you a bit of passion to go after, to say, I know I've got good, clear direction. Anybody who hasn't got that good, clear direction may wish to sort of learn from what you've done. The other thing is that obviously the great outdoors, the sustainability agenda is obviously affecting the environment that you hope your outdoor gear is being worn in. You seem, have you got any comment on, Fenix seems to be very proactive in influencing the public agenda as well. It seems like you're reaching out to the influencers and trying to make a mark on that as well. Any comment or any help for that for the audience?
So we're not so loud in what we do, so we don't go public. So for example, the traceability or transparency journey right now is more for an internal management, internal understanding before we really communicate about that on our websites, for example. But we try behind the doors to talk to industry leaders. For example, we are a member of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, the SAC, and always try to be critical in whatever they do and always face them with more questions. So, for example, we're also members in the Textile Exchange or the Fair Labor Association. So we try to discuss with other brands within the industry, what can we do as a whole industry, also in the outdoors, to really become better and do not harm the nature. And we also do that on chemicals. We always try to find new materials based on the nature, which help us. And if you look into the brand Tierra, they just won an award because they're using wool which has been burned before, and now use it as a padding because they couldn't use it before for anything else, and they just found it, and they talked to each other, and now they find another suppliers who can spin it into yarn and then use it for textile. So it's a very creative way, but we're also quite small and therefore a little bit faster maybe, and trying new ways how to operate a little bit more sustainable.
Yeah, good point. Good point of being able to proactively work within the industry groups. Great story. Great alignment. Thank you very, very much. Perhaps
Thank
the
you.
audience may have some questions coming through at the end there. Chris, if you're online, really looking forward to hearing your story with regards to Sleep Organic, again in the textile industry. So over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ian. So can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I'm just not seeing the slides up at the moment. Great. Thank you, Anna. So I'd really start by first really taking a nod to Nisa Shah. So Sleep Organic is really the brainchild of Nisa. So she and I together co-formed Sleep Organic, and it's a company wholly dedicated to ethically sourced organic bed linen. And in this talk, I hope to emphasize the importance and the benefits of going organic right across the supply chain to the various operations. So a little bit about my own background. So I have a long history of top-level research in the biomedical field. But in 2018, I decided to leave the relative security of a faculty position in Oxford University to devote myself full-time to Sleep Organic. And I did that because I believe that there is an urgent need to radically change the way we do business, the way we consume. And I think it's no exaggeration anymore to say our survival as a species depends on this. So that's my motivation for the work I do with Sleep Organic and my motivation for talking to you today. So next slide, please, Anna. Great, so I just realized I hadn't got my webcam on. I hope that's working now. So I'd like to emphasize and explain a little bit about a systems thinking approach. And then I'm going to ask you for the rest of the talk to try and view everything I say through a systems thinking lens. So what is a system? Well, we know it's an entity, but it's characterized by its interrelated and interdependent parts. And they're key characteristics I want you to bear in mind. Now, different systems overlap, as you can see in the diagram. And what that means is that one system itself may be part or a subsystem of a larger system. And these complex arrangements are typically nonlinear. They involve feedback loops, and critically, they often involve delays, and I'll come back to that point. So it requires an interdisciplinary, they're so complex that the study and understanding of them itself requires an interdisciplinary approach, collaborative approach on a global level, and an integrated approach, because you have to, after all, at the end, join up the dots and make sense of this. Now, this more comprehensive systems thinking approach just matter-of-factly describes more accurately actually how things are, the reality of how complex things are. It also allows you to predict how they will be with and without intervention. So if you look at the diagram on the bottom right, the three circles, ecosystems, social systems, and economic systems, this green hatched area, this is the area of critical interdependence. So this would be the area to focus our attention on, because here we can impact all three systems. But it's important to remember that it's a two-way street. So, for example, current economic practices are often negatively affecting the ecosystem, but that feeds back. We can't just live in isolation and say, oh, well, that's too bad, it's not my problem, because the ecosystem feeds back and can negatively then influence the economic system. So basically, this green hatched area you're seeing here, the area of the current climate change crisis actually operates in this area. So this would be the important area to focus on, because remember, it's a two-way street. So instead of working to mutual detriment, we can change the system, the economic system, so we get mutual benefit. Now, applying this to systems thinking approach across the entire supply chain, critical methodology can be used to uncover the hidden impacts, the so-called externalized impacts. Now, these can be costs or benefits, and this is critical because, in my opinion, if we truly want to move towards sustainability, we need to uncover the true cost and then ultimately have that reflected in a fair price that reflects that true cost. Next slide, please, Anna. Next slide, Anna. Yeah, great, thanks. So why is organic the sustainable choice? Now I'm going to be concentrating on organic cotton. Cotton is in the UK, over half the clothes are made from cotton, and we use organic bed linen predominantly from cotton. So the first point, and this is the first point in the supply chain, that it strengthens that. So it improves the health and livelihood of farmers. Now I don't have time to go into the details, but there's multiple reasons for this. So the first, in organic farming, There's no toxic pesticides used, so there's already the health of the farmers improved there. It enhances food security, while with conventional farming, you would just have a monoculture and it's a cash crop, no food. But in organic farming, and it decreases the risk, you'd have crop rotation or you'd have food crops grown alongside. And that creates food for the farmer in times of crisis, as we're seeing right now. So there's, again, a greater sustainability for the farmers themselves, the start of the supply chain. And then thirdly, and a lot of these farmers are in developing countries where there's a lot of poverty, and this prevents indebtedness. Why? Because the farmer is no GM crops, I should say, no GM seeds allowed in organic farming. So, and these are quite costly. So the farmer doesn't have to buy GM seeds, doesn't have to buy pesticides, and doesn't use synthetic fertilizers. So there's three major costs which are off farm that are avoided in organic farming. And this really helps to make more stable and more robust the very start of that supply chain with the farmers. And we work with large cooperatives, and we work intimately with them, and I can maybe refer to more details in questions. So next, Anna. So now there's some huge benefits of going organic in terms of farming and the supply chain and greenhouse gas emissions. So different independent research has shown that up to 94% less greenhouse gas emissions from organic compared to conventional farming. One of the major reasons it eliminates the use of fossil fuel derived nitrogen-based fertilizers. So basically your synthetic fertilizer is produced by taking nitrogen and using natural oil in a very energy intensive process. Hydrogen ions are ripped off that natural gas are ripped off that, combined with the nitrogen, and there you have ammonia, NH3. Great, but the only downside is it's very energy intensive and it releases huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. Now it gets worse because the very high levels of nitrogen in the soil tend to ruin that soil biodiversity. The soil tends to compact, it can no longer hold water, and therefore it requires more irrigation, more watering, but also the nitrogen, where does it go? So most of the nitrogen that's added doesn't stay in the soil. It leaches in as nitrates, polluting the water, or released into the atmosphere as nitric oxide, incredibly potent greenhouse gas. So you see the multiple effects of conventional farming. All of that is eliminated with organic farming. So we've wiped that out in one swipe. Now, the second point then is organic farming tends to turn the soils into a carbon sink by the organic composting and the crops. Next, Anna, please. So another major fact, and this 91% less water that organic farming uses in cotton farming compared to conventional methods. This again is verified by several independent peer-reviewed research studies. The main reason is, as I was saying before, that organic farming creates a healthy soil, and that healthy soil can soak up the water and absorb it. So that means that it's better able to cope in times of floods and also droughts. And of course, with the climate change effects happening, this is going to happen more and more often. So this gives an even greater ability to withstand the climate change issues that we're going through. And of course, with less pesticides in there, and less water, there's cost savings in treating the wastewater. So you can see again on the bottom right, the three circles. We're operating in this area of interdependence. We're creating, right at the beginning of the supply chain, creating a more stable, resilient farmer base through organic farming. And next slide, Anna, please. So how can we police this? How can we show traceability? So there is only just one global standard for organic in terms of textiles that operates right across the supply chain. So from the farmer to the finished product, including on-product labeling. So it involves strict criteria, so that environmental and social criteria, and it polices these with third-party audits. And next slide, Anna, our next segment. So the environmental criteria, let's briefly go through them. So there are it's very strictly regulated what you can and can't use. So in conventional textiles, believe it or not, it's okay to add carcinogens. It's okay, it's standard practice, which are 90-something% of cotton textiles. It'll be fixed with formaldehyde, it'll have heavy metal ions. None of that is allowed in the organic processing. And these are strictly controlled. So the laboratory analysis are done. So there's no fudging of this. If it has some of these banned substances, that's it. It's eliminated. You cannot use that and have the guts label. There's also strict control, as we've already alluded to, on wastewater and on energy consumption. And next, Anna. The social criteria as well are also strictly regulated under GOTS certification. So there's no child labor, there's safe working conditions, no discrimination. And in terms of, as Ynzo was mentioning, fair trade. So we're also fair trade certified right through the supply chain. And if you're fair trade certified and GOTS certified, fair trade will pay a higher premium, a higher minimum price guarantee. And that's very beneficial in times of price fluctuation, market volatility. And fair trade together with SAI, so our main supplier is also SA 8000 certified. These are two major players in the global living wage coalition, so they ensure a living wage for the workers, both in the factory and the farmers. Next, please, Anna. So carrying on traceability then to the final product. So the GOTS certification certifies, as I say, right through the supply chain, the various criteria. And then at the end on your product, so this would be on our bedding, you have the GOTS certified logo, the little green jersey there, the certifier in the UK, that's Soil Association, and the license number. So from that license number, the end consumer can then trace on a public database the product right through the supply chain, and you can see everything, for example, that Sleep Organic is producing and to what grade. So in terms of the packaging as well, we try to completely minimize waste. So there's no plastic packaging, but also the packaging, the inner packaging is in the material itself. So the offcuts in the factory that would normally be just discarded from our organic bedding, we get made into inner bags to contain the product. So this really minimizes the waste there, and we've insisted on that from day one. In terms of the actual outer packaging then as well, the certification allows you to put, to label these as well. So these are labeled again with your license number, and for the fair trade, it's the same. You can trace through the flow ID. So next slide, please, Anna. So in terms of transitioning and scaling this, obviously the GOTS is the gold standard, but there are various global platforms, and Textile Exchange is a very important one that can allow more brands, more retailers, more suppliers to access the organic market and to link them up with organic farmers. So the Textile Exchange have created a second certification standard that works in a complementary way to GOTS. What it does is any fabric from 5% up to 100% organic cotton. But what it's doing is it's certifying the cotton at the farmer, and it's tracing that through the supply chain. But it's not assessing environmental or social criteria, but it is confirming that the organic, the cotton was grown organically in the first place, and you get the on-product labeling. And that's a great start. But I think it's getting very urgent, and the urgency is really there to go right through to full organic, right through the supply chain. Again, looking at the top right on our interaction, the green shaded area, these three circles. That's where we'll have maximum impact. That's where we need to get to if the textile industry needs to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. That's where we'll get to develop an economic system that works in a mutually beneficial way with both people and planet. Thank you. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Chris. A heavy dependence on certification, which is a little bit different from the others. And it's a good example where there's a huge array of certification codes, and it's a matter of just finding ones that actually fit within your business goals, principles, and objectives. Just to make sure we're just knocking out of time, I know Ynzo has to dash out that door very, very quickly. There's one question here, Ynzo. If you're still, are you still online, or have you had to depart? You may have had to depart.
I'm still here.
I'll give you a quick one. I appreciate you've got to dash very quickly for something on the air. There was a question coming in of how do you measure success? How do you actually see success being generated in some of the investments that you give back through premiums, etc.? If you could just quickly cover that one, that'd be great.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's obviously not a short answer to that one. It really depends on your perspective. I mean, for us, success is a world with 100% slave-free chocolate, honestly. So it's that huge mission that we work towards. But if you measure success on a micro channel, and the the more we start working internationally, the more we need to prove also what we're doing, honestly. So the other day, somebody next to me in a conference was asking, should it be measurable? Should it be noticeable? I'm more the kind of guy that wants it to be noticeable, the change that we establish on the ground, but obviously it needs to be measurable as well. So what we have at the moment is we've installed a system at all the cooperatives that we work with, which is called the Child Labor Monitoring and Remediation System. It's the CLMRS, where we actually measure what child labor incidents we run into and how many we can actually remediate on the ground. For me, that is success. There's many different perspectives on success. The fact that you become market leader in a world where it's totally money driven and you can still make a change, you could consider success as well. So it really depends on how you look at it. But the measurability of the impact that we make on the ground, we do through, for example, the CLMRS, and the fact that we have many non-financial KPIs audited every year as well, for example.
That's good. And small steps make a difference as well, not just the big ones.
It's my favorite saying, never think you're too small to make a change. And if you think you're too small to make a change, try sharing your room with a mosquito. And I think we're the mosquito in the chocolate industry, you know, constantly buzzing and stinging left and right. But in the end, it's about inspiring others to make a change as well.
Well, that's a good takeout that I'm sure everybody will remember. Thank you very much for your time if you have to dash off.
Thank you. I'm very sorry that I need to leave. Any other questions people might have, please feel free to post them to me through any channel you can find me on.
No, good luck. Very nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
There's a lot of other questions with regards to people understanding the transparency and the traceability of the directs. In other words, the major ingredients. Is there still the same level of intensity around indirects? Saskia or Chris, can I ask, perhaps Saskia, do you actually monitor all the ingredients, or do you just concentrate on some of the majors? How do you actually manage the indirects as well as the directs?
So we're actually trying to test both. Some brands, so I mentioned before that we have 4 brands using Trust Trace system now, and some of them said, okay, we only want to trace main components like the fabrics, the one maybe we have already nominated, and other brands say we want to trace down everything which is in the product itself. So we'll see in the end of this journey, hopefully this summer or in fall, first result how it's handled, how you can handle all the information, what do you do with that, and how deep can your impact be if you have all those information.
Yeah. Chris, do you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, perhaps I could add to that. So with the GOTS certification, so all the inputs are regulated. So this would include, for example, on the textiles, the zips, the buttons, but it also would include any accessories that coming in, like new dyes. They would first of all, they'd have to have the material safety sheet, but then that wouldn't be enough. There'd be certain criteria, and laboratory analysis would be done. And then they can pay a small fee, and they can work with GOTS to get certified on that. So all inputs are assessed, and that's just part of that strict criteria. And that really is a nod to why we've gone the certification route, because any company really, no matter how big, cannot afford to be this comprehensive and cover this much. So it's actually a cost saving to subscribe to a certification system. But you're right, there's many certification systems, but the number that are so comprehensive in the textiles, and they go right across the supply chain from environmental conditions and social, are being just one, and that's GOTS. So that's why we certify to them. But we do extra criteria as well in terms of our own actions. So in terms of our packaging, as I alluded to, the offcuts are used to minimize waste there as a nod to the kind of circular economy. And that's really important for us to have minimal waste. But also in terms of our farmers, so they're a very large cooperative of farmers, and they've organized into self-help groups that then form the smaller cooperatives, bigger cooperatives, right up to national levels. So these are over 30,000 farmers, and yet they're all smallholder farmers, just maybe a couple of hectares. So we work also closely with them, and this is where Nisa, co-founder Nisa Shah at Sleep Organic, works very closely with them, and it's about mainly raising awareness. So she would work with local schools in some of the villages to raise awareness about the importance of sustainable farming and organic farming. Because we really need that to be passed on to the next generation. So our approach at Sleep Organic is to raise awareness at both ends of the supply chain, if you like. One is with the farmers, their families, their children, and the other is right with the consumer. So that would be, and that's where the GUTS product labeling helps, but that's just to start the conversation off with the fair trade label. So at trade shows, we'd emphasize through that the importance of when they're buying organic, what are they buying into and what are they not buying into in terms of how this material, how this fabric was made. So we tend to work about raising awareness on both ends of the supply chain.
Okay, that's good. Thank
And
you very
Ian,
much.
maybe to add something
Yeah.
to Chris, we
Sure.
also use garments or fabrics coming from GOTS or having the GOTS certificate. We just do not speak about it, but we trust them because it's a really high standard. Yeah, I can just agree on what just Chris mentioned about GOTS. It's a really good certification process, really strict.
And that's probably a good message for everybody with regards to consistency.
On the rooftops. It's good to spread the message. Sorry, Ian.
There's quite a lot of questions coming through, and we're trying to cram a couple in before we have to close. With regards to the difficulty of collecting this data, how do you initiate and how do you get people to fill all this data in? And is there a huge cost associated with it? Obviously, people are trying to start this journey. Can you give any insight, either Chris or Saskia? What are the others?
I mean, ours is probably slightly easier because it tends to be streamlined, and that's one of the advantages going the certification route. So we pay our fee for the GUTS certification or the fair trade, but the GUTS have strict criteria. We will see that laboratory analysis of the products, for example, and even to the extent where they've asked us, even as the final retailer, to sometimes double check the laboratory analysis of the products. But there's full auditing there. So in a way that's made simple for us, and that's part of the advantage of the thoroughness and the traceability of the certification route.
Okay.
And
Saskia,
maybe also from our side, we partnered up with Trust Trace, and since they're a startup, we grow together and we develop a lot of things together. And we have a monthly fee with them, have a monthly agreement, but it's very fair. And since they're not, a big established company, and so it's a common journey we're doing. And about the amount of data, it's quite easy because the bill of materials can be synced in automatically into the system. So the only manual work is collecting the data from the supplier, but also Trust Trace helps with that. So it's really not that data jungle as you think. It's quite good structured with the help of the system.
So maybe as people look out for the individual certifications that connects with, as I said, their principles, look also behind it the access, that it may have a fee associated with what some of the systems and data monitoring exercises that come with these various entities. So there's a lot of service. It sounds like there's a lot of service industries supporting these efforts as well that people could look at. Listen, I'm going to perhaps make a statement rather than a question. I'll just close off here, but I have a question here for Chris. It says, you've got a fan here. I love the benefits of organic farming. All the benefits on your slide are no-brainers. So why doesn't all cotton grow organically? You've certainly got a supporter there. A quick question of how to convert everybody.
Yes, I mean, I think some of the initiatives I mentioned at the end are really important, that transition. So opening up the organic market to more and more retailers. But in terms of the actual yields as well, they're getting very close to each other now. So the yields of organic farming are approximating non-organic farming. But I think in the industry, there's always this time lag, this delay, and people are reluctant to go the full route into organic. But really long term, and even if you just consider the economic situation, long term, that is the more viable option for the reasons I've said about the sustainability for the farmers, the supply chain, the quality of the soil. So there's an old saying that synthetic fertilizers are great for the father and poor for the son, because they tend to deplete the soil. And what we are finding with conventional non-organic farming is yields slowly will decrease. What normally happens is that gets a bit fudged with some of of the systems, because they just move the land and say, well, let's go to another area of land and start to deplete that instead. And it's just not sustainable.
Okay, I think we're probably opening up a brand new topic that has a lot of the audience with a lot of different views on it. So we'll perhaps have to hold that for a different day. But I thank all the speakers for their input. I hope this has been rewarding, and some of the audience has actually got something to look at. Look at their websites; they're quite informative. And I wish everybody great success in their own journey of mapping those supply chains. So Anna, over to you. Okay, I think Anna may have had it, been able to go offline. But if that's the case, I wish everybody a very good day wherever you are in the world. And as I said, good luck in continuing your own journeys. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Ian.